In section 10.4, we're going to look at how to make stem and leaf plots and histograms. And the best way to do that is just by looking at examples. So here's example number 1. A software developer advertised a position at its home office. The list below shows the number of applications the office received per day. Make a stem and leaf plot of the data. So we have our data listed, and stem and leaf plots are just like this, where you put stems over here and leaves over here. Basically what we're going to do is split these numbers up so that, like for instance, if I have 18, I would put a 1 over here and an 8 over here. If I had a 41, I'd put a 4 over here and a 1 over there. First thing I notice is I have single digits, 9 and 8. Then I have numbers in the 10s, numbers in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and that's as high as it goes up. So my stems would be the 0, the 10s, the 20s, the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And then the leaves would be all of those numbers that are after the 10, the 20, the 30, the 40, the 50. So again, I'm going to put 0 in my first blank for the stems, and then I have the 10s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. And then after that, I just put the numbers in order. So first off, I see the 9 and the 8. So I'm going to do the 8 first, and then you separate by commas. I also like to cross out my numbers as I go so I know I'm not missing any of them. Now let's move on to the 10s. I only see one number in our set of data that are in the 10s, so I'm just going to put an 8 here to represent the 18, and I'm going to cross that out. Then I'm going to look at my 20s. I'm going to underline these as I go so I know I'm not missing any. So I have 24, 27, 25, 24 again, a 29, and then I believe that is it for the 20s. And we want to put these in order. So our smallest number was 24, and we had 2 of those. So we're actually going to put those in there twice. So a 4 and a 4. Cross those out. Then we have a 25, 27, and of course the 29. Then we move on to the 30s. We have 38, 32, 38, 32, 39. So again, we're going to go in order. I had 2 32s. Then I had 2 38s. And just 1 39. Moving on to the 40s, we have 41, 42, 40, 47, and 41. So again, we're going to go in order. To represent 40, we would just put a 0. Then we had 2 41s. And we have a 42. And finally the 47. And then for the 50s, it looks like we just have a 56 and a 52, so I'm going to put a 2 and a 6. The one last thing you see here is the key. So you just want to show that when you have, for instance, the 2 and the 4, you just want to show that 2/4 is representative of 24, because you can make this line be a decimal. It could be something else to represent all the numbers. So you just want to show a key to tell the reader how to interpret the table. And here's example number 2, where we see an example of a back-to-back stem and leaf plot, which basically just puts 2 stem and leaf plots together into one graph, so we're able to see both sets of data in one visual. So the problem says the back-to-back stem and leaf plot shows the ages of participants in 2 yoga classes. Compare the ages of the participants in the 2 yoga classes. Let's look at our key first. It says 220 means 22 and 20. So they're saying from here to here is 22, from here to here is 20. So looking at this first set, I would say class 1 would have a 19-year-old, class 2 would have an 18-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 19-year-old, just to give you an example. So when we see this, once again, we have a 19-year-old in class 1, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 participants in their 20s, and 1, 2, 3, 4 participants in their 30s. But when we look at class 2, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 participants in their teens, 1, 2, 3, 4 participants in their 20s, and only 2 people in their 30s. So if we're comparing the ages of the participants in the 2 yoga classes, I would say class 2 generally has younger people in it than class 1. Here in example number 3, we're going to see an example of making a frequency table and a histogram, and these two things go hand in hand. So the problem says the number of song requests per day for a 2-week period at a radio station are shown below, and they give us this set of data. So what they're saying is on one day, 12 songs were requested. On another day, 22 songs were requested. So if it's a 2-week period, I should assume that I have 14 numbers in here. Let's first talk about what a frequency table is. A frequency table is used to group data values into equal intervals with no gaps in the intervals and no intervals overlapping. And I would say this is probably the hardest part about making a frequency table, is just trying to figure out how you're going to divide up your data. So when I'm first trying to figure out how I'm going to divide up my data into my intervals, I look for my highest number and my lowest number in my data. The lowest number was 10, and the biggest number is 34. So when I divide my data up into my intervals, I know that I need to encompass 10 to 34. On a quiz or a test, I will always tell you how many intervals I want you to divide your data up into. I've provided 4 spots to divide your intervals up into, but I actually think it might be easier to do our data into 3 of them. So we're going to take out this bottom row, and we're going to go from 10 to 19, 20 to 29, and 30 to 39. Within all of those intervals, we would be able to fit all of our data. So again, we're just going to take out this row. But again, on a test or a quiz, I will always tell you how many intervals to divide your data up into. So then a frequency table literally just keeps track of how frequent numbers within these intervals occur in our data. So if I'm looking from 10 to 19, I want to look at my data for the numbers from 10 to 19. How often do numbers from 10 to 19 show up in my data? So I have 12, 18, there's 2, 17, there's 3, 10, there's 4, 14, 5, and 15 would be 6. So I'm going to do tick marks in my frequency table to keep track of that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember, you group them in groups of 5 when you do tick marks. So then I move on to my interval from 20 to 29. So I have 22, there's 1, 26, there's 2, 26, there's 3, 28, there's 4, 20, there's 5. So I have 5 numbers show up in my data from 20 to 29. Then from 30, I have 31, there's 1, 34, there's 2, and 32, there's 3 numbers within my 30 to 39 interval. If I started with 14 numbers, I need to make sure I have 14 numbers represented in my frequency table. So this is 6, plus 5 is 11, plus 3 more is 14. Always double check that you have taken care of each number in your frequency table. So once you do a frequency table, the histogram basically takes your frequency table and turns it into a bar graph. So let's first set up our bar graph. We're going to have like a y-axis here and an x-axis here. Your intervals will always go down here, and in our case, our intervals are representing songs, and along the y-axis will be where you represent your frequency. So not only should we label our x-axis and our y-axis, but we should also give our table a title. So this was the number of song requests per day for a 2-week period, so I'm just going to title this song requests. So let's put our intervals down on the x-axis. So we have 10 to 19, we'll have a bar there. 20 to 29, I'll have a bar there. And 30 to 39, a bar there. And then since our highest frequency was 6, I'm just going to count up to 6 along the y-axis. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So then all we got to do is take our frequencies and do bars for each of our intervals. So from 10 to 19 it was 6, so I'm just going to draw a bar up to 6. From 10 to 29 we had 5, so another bar up to 5. And from 30 to 39 we had a frequency of 3. So just like that. So again, a frequency table, we just keep track of how often each number shows up within intervals, and then we go from the frequency table into the histogram. So if you're just told to make a histogram, sometimes it's easier to first make the frequency table, even though you're not specifically told to make the frequency table, because it's so much easier to go from a frequency table into a histogram. That's it for this section. Make sure you jot down anything you didn't understand that we can cover in class before we move on, and we'll see you then.